Today marks the conclusion of our sermon series on money with a very long passage from Matthew. Here it is. No one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
In the summertime, Tasha and I sit down for about a week and we start thinking about sermons. And we think about what we might like to preach about over the course of the coming year, and we make decisions about that. And then we go about the business of choosing sermon texts. And we do that, and then as the time passes, and then as the week finally arrives, I find myself thinking inevitably, as I open up a passage to think about a sermon, why did we choose this passage? And in this particular case, I have no one to blame but myself, because I think I chose all the passages for your money series, even though I have not preached all the sermons. You're welcome for that. And my problem with this passage is not the content, it's the length and the lack of ambiguity. So here it is. Jesus says we cannot serve two masters. We cannot serve God and wealth. What does this mean? It means when we have to make a decision and choose either our pocketbook or our faith, we choose our faith. That's pretty much the sermon. That's what the passage says. But I feel like you would think poorly of me if I only preached a 2-minute sermon. Some of you would love it. So I'm going to say more about it than this. Here's what I want to talk about. If you've read the Gospels, if you've ever read the Gospels, and you were paying attention, then you know that Jesus talks more about money than anything else in all the Gospels. And furthermore, when he speaks about money, he speaks very much in terms like these. He talks about it as something to be careful with. He talks about money and possessions as something to divest ourselves of. He talks about us being quite clear about serving one master, and that master being God. He talks quite clearly about these things. There's almost no ambiguity in how he speaks about money in any of the Gospels, and he does it all the time. So here is the question. If this is true, and if Jesus talks this much about money and possessions in the Gospels, and if we consider ourselves as Americans to be part of a Christian nation and a nation governed by the laws of God, why is it that we have such a messed up relationship with money and possessions? We do not have, and I'm pointing at myself as much as anybody, we do not have a healthy relationship spiritually with our bank accounts and with our stuff. Why? How has this happened? That's what I want to talk about this morning, and I want to do it this way. First, I want to say a little bit more about this passage, because there's more than just the sentence happening here. Then I want to talk about how we got ourselves into this mess, and then, if we agree at all that we're in a mess, what on earth do we do to get out of it? That's what we're going to talk about. So, I just told you the sermon, so you can basically zone out now if you don't want to have this conversation, but otherwise we're going to get started. So, this passage is translated differently in the NRSV than it is in most other English translations. What's the big difference? It is the final word of the passage. The passage I read to you today, the final word was what? It was wealth. In most translations, they leave the original word untranslated. Do you know what that original word was? It was mammon. Have you heard that word before? Mammon. If you've been going to church for a while in your lives, you have probably heard the word mammon. And what does it mean? And why is it untranslated in so many English translations of the passage? Here's why. It's not a Greek word. Mammon is not a Greek word. We are reading a Greek gospel, but it is not a Greek word. It is, in fact, an Aramaic word. It's of that regional dialect that Jesus and his disciples spoke. And it was based and used for talking about loans. So it covers property and wealth, this idea of mammon. But for us as Christians, the word mammon has been synonymous for a very long time with the problems that we encounter with money and wealth. I'm going to read a quote for you. It's not from me. Here's the quote. I'm going to read it twice. I'm a visual person, so it takes me at least twice to get stuff that I've heard, as Tasha can tell you. Mammon is the form of idolatry with which the devil operates after the old gods no longer appealed to the masses that had become Christian. I'll read it again. Mammon is the form of idolatry with which the devil operates after the old gods no longer appealed to the masses that had become Christians. That quote comes from a 5th century Christian writer. For 1,600 years, we in the church have recognized the problem with idolatry and mammon. After people were no longer tempted by the old gods of Zeus and Apollo, we were tempted by the new god of mammon. And we have known this was a problem for a very long time. So, if we knew it 1,600 years ago that mammon was a problem and that mammon is the new god whom we worship, why have we yet to solve the problem? Well, I have theories about this. I'm glad you asked. My first theory is not related to time or place in any way. My first theory is this. The reason we haven't solved the mammon problem of wealth and possessions is because we as human beings are inherently lazy. We want to do as little as possible, and we want to have to do almost nothing. We have learned that the more money we have and the more stuff we have, the less we have to do. I will give you an example. Consider for a moment your washer and dryer. Why do you have them? Is it because clothes couldn't possibly be cleaned otherwise? No. There's plenty of rocks down by the river where we could take our bar of soap and scrub out our clothes, and then we could hang them out on a line to dry and wait like 10 days until they were dry, and then they would be really stiff. But that would take forever, and it would be really hard. And so we have a washer and a dryer. And you throw the clothes in, you move them to the dryer, you take them out, and you hang them up. And still and yet, what do we tell people about our days when we have to do laundry? It was a laundry day. I did 4 loads. We are so lazy. And our stuff and our money is what we have come up with to see to it that we do as little of that type of stuff as possible, that we almost never have to do anything. Solves that problem. So that's timeless. But there's also something very specific to this present moment in which we live and this place in which we live, and it's called capitalism. Now, there's nothing wrong with capitalism. Capitalism does a lot of good things for us. It's raised our quality of living. Nobody's ever lived at a higher quality of life than us in this place now in the history of humanity, largely because of capitalism. But we have to understand also that capitalism works for mammon. How? I will give you an example. I would like for you to conjure in your head, if you are able, the image, and I know at least one of you is, of a nacho cheese Dorito. Do you have it? Can you picture the nacho cheese Dorito? Most of us in our lives have eaten a nacho cheese Dorito. Have you ever eaten just one? Probably not. Probably once you started, you ate about 50 of them. How did this happen? Was it just a magnificent stroke of luck that they discovered the irresistible nacho cheese Dorito? No. That nacho cheese Dorito, which you hold when you pull it out of the packet, is one of hundreds of prototypes. Millions and millions of dollars have been invested in that nacho cheese Dorito. Artists, chemists, chefs, neuroscientists, all of these people have put their considerable knowledge, expertise, and education into that nacho cheese Dorito. There are 30 or 40 different nacho cheese Doritos that vary only in how crunchy they are, because it is partially the crunch that makes us want another one. So it has to be the perfect level of crunchiness. All of it, all of that work, all of that expertise, all of that time, all of that money put into the nacho cheese Dorito. Why? So that you couldn't possibly have just one of them. Right. So that you would eat the whole bag. The whole key to what's happening around us, the whole key is that we always want more. The whole system functions on the idea that we always want more, which coincidentally is what Mammon teaches us. We always want more. We always want more of a house, more of a car, more shirts, a firmer couch, a better mattress, longer pants. We want more of almost everything. We have to understand, if we are to hear the ways in which Jesus is talking to us about money and wealth, if we are to truly hear it, we have to understand what's going on around us. There are millions of different nacho cheese Doritos in our field of vision every day. All of them telling us that we can't have just one. So let's say, hypothetically, that we believe this idea. Let's say that we believe that Jesus talked in a very specific way about wealth and possessions. And let's say that we call ourselves his followers. And let's imagine for a moment that we want to apply his teachings to every phase of our lives, including our relationship to our money and our stuff. What are we to do? There is one word which functions as the kryptonite of mammon. There is one word. This is all it takes, but it's incredibly difficult. All we have to do is look at mammon and say, enough. I have enough. I have enough clothes. I have a large enough house. I have a good enough car. I have enough. I don't need any more. That's it. That's all we have to do. We just have to be able to look at the world around us and the stuff around us and the money around us and have some idea in our mind of what is enough. And then think about our faith. Does the word enough ever apply to our life as a follower of Jesus? Isn't there something in the Bible about praying without ceasing? About meditating on God's law day and night? Do you have enough grace? Have you read enough scripture? Have you loved enough people? Have you prayed enough? Has God given us enough love, enough salvation? Has God's vision of the kingdom which is to come, the kingdom which Jesus inaugurated, is that a little bit of that? That's probably enough. In our lives of faith, there is no enough. How many times have you sat in worship on a Sunday morning? How many times? You come almost every Sunday, all of you. Have you had enough? Have you sung enough hymns? Heard enough anthems? Listened to enough sermons? Don't answer that. Have you had enough? Have you spent enough time with each other? Have you been to enough Bible studies? Have you served on enough mission projects? Have you been to enough First Sunday suppers? Have you done enough of it? In our lives of faith, we never, ever feel like we have enough. We reach one destination, and that comes in the next life. In this life, we are on a pilgrimage, and every day requires another step in our lives of faith as followers of Jesus. We don't get enough. But if we say to Mammon that we can never get enough, how can we say that to Christ? It is only when we say enough to the wealth, the possessions, the money, the stuff. It is only when we say enough that we can embrace what we need and what we are called to do in our relationship with Christ. We can only have one master. And that is the master from whom grace and justice, peace and love, hope and salvation flows. We won't find it at the store. We won't find it in our bank account. We can only find it through Jesus Christ. And believe me when I say to you, friends, in him it is enough. Amen.